Is a Whole Lie by Amethyst Unarmed, Part 8 of the Truth series. Read by Kaiinbed. Relationship includes Eraserhead, Present Mike. Additional tags include Hero Public Safety Commission bashing, Married Eraserhead and Present Mike, Parental and Protective Aizawa Shota, Eraserhead adopts Shinso and Eri, Protective All Might, All Might tries, the inherent privilege of being All Might, implied or referenced child abuse, child soldiers, government conspiracy, terrorist attack aftermath, and canon typical violence aftermath. Summary. Aizawa Shota finds it. He finds what Hawks, or the man who was once the pro-hero Hawks, sent him on a wild goose chase for. It cost him 6 nights of sleep and a decade's worth of premature wrinkles for both himself and his husband. The files aren't on any public record. Indeed, they haven't been digitized at all. Aizawa only finds them because, after days of frustration trying to access any sort of file about Hawks online, there is a massive attack at the HPSC. The kind of attack that brings shit to the surface. As much as he hates to say it, he knows his success is solely thanks to the actions of the League of Villains, or the Paranormal Liberation Army, whatever they're calling themselves now. Or, Aizawa does some research. He confronts All Might about what he finds. Aizawa Shota finds it. He finds what Hawks, or the man who was once the pro-hero Hawks, sent him on a wild goose chase for. It cost him 6 nights of sleep and a decade's worth of premature wrinkles for both himself and his husband. The files aren't on any public record. Indeed, they haven't been digitized at all. Aizawa only finds them because, after days of frustration trying to access any sort of file about Hawks online, there is a massive attack at the HPSC. The kind of attack that brings shit to the surface. As much as he hates to say it, he knows his success is solely thanks to the actions of the League of Villains, or the Paranormal Liberation Army, whatever they're calling themselves now. After the attack, the Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters is in shambles. Half of the building is condemned. A charred skeleton frame and piles of dust are the only remnants of the building's western wing. Temporary fencing blocks the public from getting too close to the disaster zone. Haggard military with large artillery guard the gates. Shota flashes his hero license and walks forward as though he belongs there. He prepares his harshest glare for the guard's pushback. He's named it Moneta after its creator. But he apparently shouldn't have bothered. The guards let him by without a second glance. Shota was thankful for his poker face, because he was floored. Was the commission really this off balance from the attack? Just letting heroes wander through the property willy-nilly? Once Shota gets past the fence, he understands a little better. The building is crawling with heroes called in for the rebuilding efforts. Heroes with strength quirks removing rubble and husks of burned furniture. Heroes with mending quirks carefully restoring millions of yen of equipment. Heroes with sensory quirks looking for survivors and bodies. So many bodies. Shota is brutally reminded of where his intel has come from. The commission hasn't released the death tolls, but everyone knows they're in the triple digits, if not higher. Shota hadn't liked seeing Hawks being treated like that, but he watches as another body is placed in a black zipper bag and grits his teeth behind his scarf. He keeps walking. What he needs isn't among the wreckage. Shota slips between the recovery efforts and heads toward an area that has yet to be touched. The east end of the building is currently off limits. It is standing but has been deemed structurally unstable. Shota ducks under the caution tape and climbs the stairs. The area he is looking for is on the 3rd floor, according to the blueprints Shota stumbled upon. Aizawa ducks around depowered metal detectors and abandoned guard stations. Aizawa is sure that the higher-ups would have insisted this area be secured above all else, but everyone with authority to do so is either dead or in the ICU. The records room looks boring, at first glance. Rows upon rows of file cabinets, most with a healthy coating of dust across their tops. It wasn't sophisticated or high-tech. In fact, despite all the security and cameras outside, Shota couldn't even spot a camera in the room itself. The lack of technology in the room made his skin crawl. What was it that was so important that they couldn't risk digitizing it? What secrets required this level of both security and obscurity? He begins skimming through the files to find out. By the time Aizawa finds the right file cabinet, he is sick to his stomach. The file with the name Keigo Takumi only makes it worse. The file is organized under the program name The Heroes of Tomorrow. This name would be innocuous if not for the picture included of Hawks when the commission first took him in. The child in the picture is tiny, clearly unfed by the way his shirt hangs off of him. In a following medical document, Shota can count the kid's ribs. The file is one of the thickest in the cabinet. It contains details of all of Takumi's training sessions, dated up to the week before the pro hero Hawks went missing. None of it is good, but Aizawa thinks the worst part is the transcripts, seeing in real time as the excitable boy Keigo Takumi became the child soldier Hawks. Eventually, Aizawa can't read anymore, and he shoves the file in his bag. The documents within it would be more than enough to deal a blow to the HPSC on their own, but some instinct in him spurs him to keep looking. He sees dozens of names he doesn't know, of kids the commission thinks could be shaped into their own personal weapons, but he is aware enough to admit that it's the names he knows that really draws his attention. He sees the names of heroes he's worked alongside, students from his past classes, students from his current classes, 1A, Midoriya, Todoroki, Yayorozu. But two files in particular stick out to him. There are files next to each other, alphabetically. In fact, they are even paperclipped together, as though intrinsically intertwined, even in paper. And Aizawa supposes he cannot fault them, because he thinks of his children in the same way. Aizawa Eri, Aizawa Hitoshi. He and Mike have decided after a long argument that taking Aizawa's last name was the best route. I'm a spotlight hero, Hizashi had reminded him gently. Even if I blend in well with crowds, my personal name is still pretty well known. It's safer this way. So, despite Aizawa's complaining, their children only carried his name. This was, of course, outlined in great detail in the folders Shota had found. The folders are thick with documents and are a solid weight in Shota's hand. Even just flipping through them, the detail impressed him. Every detail of the adoption process was notated. It even lists the 3 attorneys Aizawa had fired once they had tried to advise them to work on an easier case than Hitoshi's. All of Hitoshi's medical history and transcripts of his sessions with his court counselor were inside as well. And then, finally, a folder for the Heroes of Tomorrow program. He scans down the document and Aizawa nearly drops the folder. His hand starts shaking so badly he can barely read the words on the paper. But he can recognize his husband's ugly orange car, can easily make out the picture of him leaving it. He recognizes the diagram of a car bomb from a recent raid he was part of regarding a terrorist organization. It isn't hard to put the plan together. On the next page, he is greeted with a picture of himself. This sits easier in his chest, and his hands grow steady enough for him to look over a detailed copy of his own patrol route. There is an addendum attached with notes from a quirk analyst with a list of villains that both hold a grudge against him and would be good matchups against his quirk. It's an instructional guide on how to kill the hero, Eraserhead. He swallows. His body feels far away. He can barely feel his own fingers as he turns to the next page. It is the same quirk analyst notes on Hitoshi's quirk, and all the ways the commission could utilize it for espionage and infiltration. It is a detailed description of how to turn his son into a government-toppling war criminal. Eri's file is somehow much, much worse. Other than containing duplicate files on how to kill Aizawa and his husband, this file has no mention of hero work or assassin tactics. In fact, it is quite the opposite. The file is dedicated to ways to keep Eri contained in a small padded room for the rest of her days, while she extends the lives of the Commission's top agents. Aizawa snaps the file shut before he really knows what he is doing. He shoves it in his bag, along with every other file that contains a name he recognizes. He isn't sure how much of it will be useful, but he knows he'll need it. He's doing one last scan through Hawks' folder when he notices it. The clearance level on the file is higher than any Aizawa has ever seen before. Only the top members of the Hero Commission would be available to see these files. In fact, the list of those allowed to read it is so short that they are listed right here on the page. Aizawa blinks and rereads one of the names listed in green. No, that can't be right. It must be the dry eye getting to him. Or he is finally hallucinating from the lack of sleep. He rubs his eyes, pressing so hard it takes a moment for the paper to come back into focus. But still, the name remains. The only people who should be able to access this file are the heads of the HPSC and, Aizawa means, their top officer. Because there on the list of approved staff is Yagi Toshinori. A fire breaks out at the already devastated Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters. It is assumed to be from a leaking gas line or a damaged electrical line, though how this occurred in the relatively undamaged east wing of the building is a mystery. Everyone agrees that it was impossible for an arsonist to have snuck into the midst of so many pro-heroes. The fire was quickly dealt with, but the treasured archives room was a total loss. Toshinori tries not to let the pale blank walls of the meeting room get to him. He pulls at the collar of his shirt and checks his watch again. Aizawa is nearly 5 minutes late for their meeting, and the tardiness concerns him. Aizawa has never been late before, much less to a meeting he demanded Toshinori attend. He isn't sure what to expect from the meeting Aizawa mandated. Sure, it wouldn't be the first meeting the two of them had throughout Toshinori's time at UA, but he cannot for the life of him think what could have prompted one today. Midoriya hadn't broken a bone or manifested a new quirk in over a week. Toshinori hadn't touched the coffee pot since the day he'd broken it, and Aizawa had to be pulled away by Yamada. He is nearly done with his teaching license classes as well. What could he have possibly done to garner young Aizawa's attention? As if hearing his thoughts, Aizawa slams the door open without warning. Toshinori jumps, and blood splatters across the table as he coughs. He takes out his handkerchief and begins wiping up his mess. "Ah, Aizawa-kun, you scared me," he chuckles, but Aizawa's grim eyes don't laugh with him. If anything, they grow colder. Aizawa turns and locks the door. At that, Toshinori's neck begins to prickle. Aizawa isn't looking at him like he is a coworker, or even with utter disdain, like he had at the beginning of the year. He is gazing at Toshinori like a villain, like he is cataloging every weakness. Toshinori is all too aware of how many he has these days. "Aizawa, what is the meaning of... Did you know?" "What?" Aizawa throws a large file onto the counter, at least an inch thick. Label tabs lined the sides of the folder. Some were labeled with an unfamiliar name, Takami Keigo. The others seemed to be files about Hawks. All Might recognized the symbol stamped on them. "Eraserhead, how did you come across files from the HPSC?" "Not by any legal means, if that's what you're asking. But that wasn't the question. I'll ask again. Did you know?" This may be the angriest Toshinori has ever seen his fellow teacher. He isn't using his quirk, but his cold black eyes still burn into Toshinori all the same. Toshinori frantically waves his hands in denial. "Aizawa, I don't even know what we're talking about, much less whatever is in the files." "It's all information on Hawks. Turns out he was in a special program as a kid." Aizawa begins circling the table. His eyes never leave Toshinori, afire with judgment. On instinct, Toshinori tries to activate his muscle form, and ends up coughing up blood. Aizawa raises an eyebrow at him, as though asking if he's finished. It's a look he's gotten from the man numerous times over the past year they've worked together, but never before has it contained this much malice. "It's called the Heroes of Tomorrow Initiative, a fancy name for what is essentially a child soldier pipeline. Though Takami Keigo wasn't their first subject, he was their most successful." "That name, you keep referring to this Takami. Who is he?" "Hawks. That's Hawks' real name." That's... How on earth did Toshinori not recognize that name? He'd worked with Hawks on numerous missions, met him at banquets and award ceremonies, and yet only knew his hero moniker? Toshinori flushed at the thought. Aizawa must have recognized his embarrassment because he huffed. Don't berate yourself. The commission sealed his name to keep Hawks detached from his upbringing before they started training him. Upbringing? Training? Aizawa sighs with exasperated annoyance, as though it is Toshinori's fault he has no idea what they are talking about. At age 6, Keiko Takumi was taken in by the Hero Public Safety Commission, a year after his father was arrested by Endeavor. His mother was, of course, rewarded handsomely for parting with her son. Read between the lines, All Might. Aizawa spits the name at him, as though it is something to be ashamed of. You can't seriously be insinuating that the commission bought a child? Aizawa huffs. It's not an insinuation. It's the only logical conclusion. Though it sickens Toshinori to say it, he agrees. Heroes like Hawks. Normally Toshinori would say they were 1 in a million, but he supposes the odds are higher if he had been raised for this. But if that was the case, why would young Hawks turn to villainy? Toshinori asked, more to himself than to Aizawa. Growing up around heroes his entire life obviously inspired him to become one himself. What changed? You mean other than the compounding of repressed trauma from years of physical and emotional torture? Toshinori winces. Yes, other than that. Aizawa huffs. As far as I can tell, he never wavered until he was assigned a mission to infiltrate the League of Villains. This is the point where the records start to get blurry. Most of these reports come from Hawks himself, so it is safe to presume the information in them could be unreliable. The Commission certainly believes he was withholding information. His reports became shorter, less detailed. His progress on the case stalled. Things only got worse after Best Jeanus' death, when Hawks began to... What? Best Jeanus isn't dead. He's merely retired. The Commission just doesn't want to announce the loss of another top 10 hero with how shaky things have been. Best Jeanus is dead. Aizawa opens the vial to a page marked in a dark blue tab. It opens to a mission report Toshinori doesn't bother to read, because there is a picture of Best Jeanus' corpse paperclipped to it. He has been stuffed into a duffel bag, throat sliced cleanly open, trachea exposed where his neck is at an impossible angle. Even in the picture, Toshinori can see the rigor mortis in the contorted angles of his limbs. His face is bloated and his jaw is slack agape. Hawks killed him. He was working against the Commission before? No, they're the ones who ordered him to do it. Toshinori's heart rings in his ears. That can't be possible. Best Jeanus was a good hero, a great one even. Toshinori hadn't seen it, but he'd heard the other heroes recounting of the night in Camino. At the Nomu factory, the way Jeanus had gotten the rest of the heroes out of the way, fighting even through the stab wound. Toshinori had been so relieved he lived. It had been considered a medical miracle. And the Commission had just ordered him dead? Why? He stammers. Why would he do that? The League had demanded proof of Hawks' commitment. Best Jeanus was too injured to return to hero work and was considered an acceptable loss. Through this entire conversation, Aizawa's voice stayed completely level, emotionless. That might be the bit that bothers Toshinori the most. His hands clench into fists, ripping the report at its edges. I see. He'd meant to visit Best Jeanus, both while he was at the hospital and once he'd been released. They weren't close, not by any means, but they'd worked together often, and Toshinori had wanted to see his recovery for himself. But he'd been so busy. He kept telling himself he'd get to it, that he'd send the text next week. He supposes it doesn't matter now. A few weeks after this, Aizawa drones, like this is a particularly boring lesson plan, rather than the death of a hero they'd both worked closely with. Hawks arrested a number of thugs associated with the Bare Bones gang during a grocery store robbery. An EMT reported that he was acting strangely, but refused treatment at the hospital. According to the Commission, he reportedly flew to a meeting with the villain Dabi and completely disappeared off the grid. Overnight, his bank accounts were drained and his apartment was abandoned. He was considered KIA until his debut with the League of Villains a few months later. Toshinori just stares at the file in front of him. For just a moment, a brief, selfish part of him wishes he had never come to teach at UA, because he was the symbol of peace, for Japan, for the world, and most specifically for the Hero Commission. And he isn't sure what that means anymore. Aizawa continues, either oblivious to his turmoil or indifferent to it. There's more. I discovered files for UA students as well. Most of their files start when they were accepted to UA, but there are a select few who were apparently considered for the program early. Yayurozu, Todoroki, Hagakure. He pulls more files from his briefcase. Each of them was considered to be a highly valued asset. Upon the death of their parents, all three of them would have immediately become wards of the commission. In fact, when Todoroki first got his scar, the commission nearly got custody. If it wasn't for Endeavor's life being so public, I'm certain they would have gotten it. Toshinori looks over the files, and with each page, he feels sicker. The files contain the entirety of his students' lives, every doctor appointment, every report card, records more detailed than any biography. The worst part is the analysis of their quirks, their current capabilities, and the plans. God help them, the plans. The first few pages of Hagakure's file are requests written to the UA support department, and then Power Loader himself for Hagakure's DNA. All Might remembers fondly the way the girl had squealed with excitement the day her special armored bodysuit had been sent in straight from the labs at the Hero Commission. It had been lightweight, compact, and most importantly, invisible as Hagakure herself. Hagakure's is full of laboratory reports. The reports in this folder discuss the creation of the suit. It then goes into details on the test upon test that have been performed on the DNA samples, and subsequently applied to different weapons and cloaking devices. The latter pages are full of commission assassination plans that have failed that a quirk like Hagakure's could have improved. Yagurozu's file is full of theories regarding her abilities, rather than her quick wit and battle strategy. The commission seems more interested in the girl as a factory rather than a hero. Pages are dedicated to the cost efficacy of using Yagurozu to make tanks and assault rifles, rather than pay for the materials and labor necessary to create them. The theory delves further, with a particular interest in making uranium and nuclear weapons. The quirk analysts gave their best overview of whether or not Yagurozu would be able to handle radioactive materials she made, but the conclusion states, test with subject necessary. Shoto Todoroki's file is not nearly as complicated as either of these. Todoroki's file is merely a training plan, albeit a training plan from the darkest, vilest minds society has to offer. Most of the training involved exposure therapy to rid Shoto of his fear of fire. The next page is a list of the most discreet locations to place burns. There is even a section with contact information for a doctor with a quirk that could completely remove young Todoroki's scar. The commission seems to believe that with the removal of his facial deformity and extensive social coaching, Todoroki could become as much a media darling as Hawks. Toshinori finds that, try as he might, he cannot imagine Todoroki without the scar on his face, much less with the brilliant and charismatic smile that had been Hawks' signature. It felt wrong. In the case of Endeavor's death, the commission gets custody over Shoto, rather than another blood relative. There is signed documentation from Endeavor, signed with a caveat that they continue Shoto's hero training to the highest caliber. Young Todoroki has an older sister, he knows. He has met her at parent-teacher conferences. She's timid and quick to apologize, temperament nearly opposite of her younger brother. But it's obvious how much she cares about him, how she is willing to take up responsibilities Endeavor is too busy to handle. Toshinori can't imagine why Endeavor would want to keep those two apart. Eraserhead just keeps talking. He's pretty sure Aizawa has said more to him today than he has in the past year they've been working together. Midoriya has one as well, though not for his quirk. Between his test scores and submitted work in hero subjects, the commission was going to snag him as an analyst. Seems like the plans were abandoned the summer before he applied to UA. They stopped because I started training him, Toshinori realizes in horror. If Midoriya had disappeared, Toshinori would have stopped at nothing to locate his successor again. But when he thinks about that tiny, quirkless boy he left on that building, the one the hero scolded for jumping in to save his friend when no one else would anyone have looked for him? Why are you telling me all of this? Toshinori mutters, not looking up from the files. The information swims in his vision. He is looking over the edge of a cliff, with no railing to steady him as he sways. Aizawa pushes him over the edge. "Because," he says, as he turns to the last page of Hawks' file, "you signed off on it." He plummets, and can only stare in horror at the signature of both Yagi Toshinori and All Might. And he remembers. There is a knock on his office door. All Might looks up from the paperwork he has been frowning at for the past hour. Not for the first time, he considers hiring a psychic. Running an agency has been much more difficult than he expected. There is another knock on the door. "Come in," he says, and tries to stand. He bangs his knee on the too small desk and curses, just in time for the woman to enter. It takes him a moment to recognize her. He'd only seen her once on TV, during her appointment. Perhaps he ought to get better acquainted with his new boss. The Hero Public Safety Commission president has arrived at the mighty agency. "I have some things for you to sign. The new compliance documents for agency healthcare, acknowledgement of your yearly bonus plan as the #1 hero, support for a new social work program, additional tax documentation for a social work program." Toshinori perks up. "Implemented so soon into your tenure. You must feel strongly about it." The president chuckles and nods. "Yes, I do. I believe it is our path for the future." She takes a file out of her stack of documents and slaps it on the table in front of him. "The Heroes of Tomorrow program." She nods. "It's a special mentoring program in order to help underprivileged children get the training they need to become pro-heroes. No one's social class should stop them from saving someone." She lights up as she describes the program. There is a ferocity in her voice as she spits out the last sentence. He remembers seeing somewhere that she is the youngest commission president to ever take the position. And with ideas like this, Toshinori can't help but think it's a change for the better. This is someone who has a hero's heart. "Well, you've sold me on the idea," he booms, laughing. "I can't imagine a better person for the job." The commission president blushes and tucks one of her bangs behind her ear. "I'm oversimplifying it, really. Feel free to look over the document. I'm sure you'll have questions." "Nonsense. I see your passion, and furthermore, I believe in your goal. If it's my support you need, you have it." Toshinori flips to the back of the folder and signs both of his names on the printed lines. "I truly believe this is going to be a new golden age for heroes. We're going to do great things." She smiles down at his signatures with an emotion he can't place. "Yes," she assures him. "We will." Toshinori can only stare up at Aizawa. There is a rolling, welling lump rising in his throat, and he can't speak past it. Aizawa doesn't wait for him. From what I can tell, she had an easy time selling her plan once she proved that All Might had signed off on it. He drones. His eyes tightly follow Toshinori's every movement. He doesn't recognize the emotion nestling in his chest. It rumbles through his chest like a thunderstorm, but it hurts, an old ache. It feels like a stab wound he'd never realized he received. "She told me that. Did you even bother reading over the document she put in front of you?" Honestly, Toshinori can't remember. He remembers so many dumb details. He remembers her peach-colored pantsuit. He remembers being impressed with her updo in a painful way that reminded him of his mentor. He remembers the way she smiled when he signed the papers, the way the wrinkles and stress lines vanished from her forehead. She looked like he saved her. But the documents themselves, he can't recall a thing about them. He takes too long to answer. Aizawa scoffs. "Of course you didn't. I don't know why I'm even surprised. I'm sure the free press seemed like a dream, but your commission-sanctioned approval ranking skyrocketed." The words are bitter and biting, and worst of all, true. That was when the gap between All Might and the rest of the top 10 really started to widen. It was at the following Hero Billboard ratings that he was first called the symbol of peace. Toshinori feels like the room is spinning around him. That can't be true, he mumbles, more to himself than anything. It's the wrong thing to say. Aizawa stills. For a moment, Toshinori is certain that he stops even breathing. "Care to repeat that?" he says, in a voice calm as the surface of a lake before an alligator lunges out. I don't... Toshinori can't find the words. He knows he needs to reassure Aizawa, to beg his innocence, but every plea that comes to mind feels far too weak in the wake of Aizawa's wrath. And doesn't he deserve it? Aizawa laughs. It's a mean, bitter thing. Toshinori is even tempted to call it villainous. All of that information in front of you and you still refuse to see what a danger you are? Even though Toshinori is effectively quirkless, Aizawa still activates his quirk. Glowing red eyes pin Toshinori to his seat. I have never approved of you teaching here. I think you're reckless and your teachings are just as likely to get the kids killed as they are to help them. You're trying. Anyone can see that you're trying. But if you for one moment think that takes precedence of the sheer amount of fucked up material in these files, you are an even bigger idiot than I thought. Aizawa's capture weapon thrashes and curls like a wild thing. Toshinori flinches as it whips by his face. I'm here because I will kill the former #1 hero if it means keeping my students safe. So you are going to tell me everything you know about this project, and then you are going to give me a damn good reason why Yagi Toshinori isn't going to mysteriously disappear. And then Toshinori sees it. Aizawa has been hiding it, feigning nonchalance throughout the whole sham of an interrogation. But in this moment of anger, he loses control. Aizawa looks terrible. The man never looks well rested in the first place. But this is excessive. His eyes are sunken, bags deeper and darker than usual. Toshinori's fairly certain foundation has been smeared over them. His eyes are bloodshot and watery. Mere moments of quirk use, nearly reducing the man to tears. His shoulders are slumped, and his fists shake where they are clenched at his side. Toshinori had considered himself to be the one under attack, but perhaps Aizawa is the one backed into a corner, lashing out at whoever he can. And suddenly, the words come. Toshinori always has done best when he is trying to save someone. Aizawa, I swear to you, I know nothing about this. You can't possibly believe I would have anything to do with this. Aizawa deflates. The tiredness increases tenfold as he slumps into the chair next to Toshinori. His forehead falls into the table with a heftier thump than Toshinori is comfortable with. Aizawa sighs and forces himself to sit up. Toshinori can see the fogged ghost of his breath on the linoleum. Unfortunately, no, I don't. You can be an idiot, certainly. Toshinori chooses to blame this comment on the rough day his coworker has clearly had, and a terrible teacher. But you're a good man. It isn't logical to think you would have done this without coercion. But I needed to check. I needed to see your real reaction. He gives Toshinori an appraising once-over, as though gauging whether or not Toshinori is going to attack him. He doesn't seem to regret his actions, and honestly, Toshinori doesn't either. He would have much rather kept his colleague's trust, particularly after a mistake of this magnitude. And it doesn't change these files, or the fact your name is on them. But they're using you, as a symbol, as a shield, I don't know. But you are part of the reason why they were able to get this far. You're right, Toshinori agrees. I should have been more diligent, and he looks over the vast sea of files that cover the table. I can't take back what's happened, but I swear to you, I'm going to do everything in my power to fix it. For the first time today, Toshinori sees a flicker of Aizawa's terrifying smile. Good, because I'm going to need your help. You have just finished listening to Is a Whole Lie by Amethyst Unarmed, Part 8 of the Truth series. If you enjoyed the story, please leave them some feedback on archiveofourown.org/work/38630553. And if you enjoyed my reading of the story, you can find me on twitter.com/Kaiinbed.